Hello everyone! Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. I'm an emergency room nurse at Mercy General Hospital in Portland, Oregon. Or at least I was until I submitted my resignation last week. You can call me Sarah Mitchell if you want, though most people in the ER just called me Mitch during my 15 years there. I've seen everything you can imagine in emergency nursing: car crashes, overdoses, heart attacks, stabbings, and every kind of human suffering that walks through those automatic doors at 3 in the morning. But what I'm about to tell you about is the one shift that made me question everything I thought I knew about life and death and ultimately led me to leave nursing entirely. Mercy General is a Level 1 trauma center serving the greater Portland metropolitan area. It's a sprawling complex built in phases over the last 40 years, with a 32-bed emergency department that handles roughly 80,000 patients annually. During my time there, I primarily worked night shifts, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., because I preferred the intensity and the unpredictability of emergency medicine after dark. Night shifts in a major urban ER are like riding a roller coaster blindfolded. You might have 3 hours of relative calm followed by absolute chaos. Or you might be running code, blues and trauma alerts from the moment you clock in until you stumble out exhausted at sunrise. The night of January 23, 2024, started like any other winter evening in the Pacific Northwest. It was bitter cold outside, the kind of bone-chilling weather that makes even the homeless seek shelter wherever they can find it. The temperature had dropped to 18 degrees, which is unusually frigid for Portland, and a thick fog had settled over the city like a suffocating blanket. I had been on shift since 11 p.m., and by 2:30 a.m., we had already seen our usual array of hypothermia cases, slip-and-fall injuries from icy sidewalks, and a few alcohol-related incidents from people trying to warm themselves with liquid courage. I was restocking supplies in Trauma Bay 3 when our charge nurse, Rebecca Santos, approached me with a concerned expression. Rebecca had been working emergency medicine for nearly 25 years and was known for her unflappable demeanor, even in the most stressful situations. If something was bothering her, it was worth paying attention to. "Mitch, we've got something unusual coming in," she said, her voice carrying an edge I rarely heard. "What kind of unusual?" I asked, continuing to organize the medical supplies while listening. "EMS is bringing in a family of 4, parents and 2 young children. They were found in their car on the side of Highway 26, engine running, heater on full blast, but all 4 of them were unconscious and showing signs of severe hypothermia." That didn't make immediate sense to me. If the car was running and the heater was working, how could an entire family become hypothermic while sitting inside a warm vehicle? Carbon monoxide poisoning, maybe, I suggested. That was the most logical explanation for a family becoming unconscious in a running car. "That's what EMS thought initially," she replied. "But their carbon monoxide levels are normal. Oxygen saturation is good. No signs of poisoning or drug use." The paramedics are baffled. They said the strangest thing is that when they found them, the car windows were completely fogged up from the inside, but the condensation was frozen solid, like ice crystals covering every surface of the interior. I stopped what I was doing and looked at Rebecca directly. In 15 years of emergency nursing, I'd never heard of anything quite like that. Condensation freezes when the temperature drops significantly. But if the heater was running and keeping the car warm enough for people to survive inside, how could the moisture freeze? "What's their ETA?" I asked, already moving toward Trauma Bay 1, where we typically handled the most complex cases. 5 minutes out," Rebecca said. "And Mitch, there's something else." The paramedics said the family's body temperatures are so low that their breath is visible inside the ambulance, even with the heat on maximum. I've never seen anything like that. We quickly assembled our team in Trauma Bay 1. Besides Rebecca and myself, we had Dr. Amanda Chen, our attending physician who specialized in emergency medicine and toxicology, Michael Rodriguez, our respiratory therapist, and Jennifer Walsh, another experienced ER nurse. We prepared warming blankets, heated IV fluids, and all the equipment we typically used for severe hypothermia cases. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this case was going to be unlike anything we had encountered before. The ambulance arrived at 2:47 a.m., and I'll never forget the sight of those paramedics wheeling in the first patient. Tom Bradley, the lead paramedic who I had worked with countless times over the years, looked genuinely shaken as he gave us the report. The patient was David Morrison, a 38-year-old accountant, and when they moved him from the ambulance stretcher to our hospital bed, I could see what Tom meant about visible breath. Even inside our heated trauma bay, David's exhalations created small puffs of vapor that lingered in the air longer than should have been physically possible. His core body temperature is 79.4 degrees, Tom reported as we connected David to our monitors. That's the lowest I've ever recorded in a conscious patient, and somehow he's still breathing on his own with a steady pulse. His skin is pale blue, consistent with severe hypothermia, but his vital signs are more stable than they should be given his body temperature. I began my initial assessment while the team worked to get David connected to warming equipment. His pulse was slow but surprisingly strong at 42 beats per minute. Blood pressure was low at 80/50, but not dangerously so. Most remarkably, his oxygen saturation was 96% on room air, which was excellent considering his condition. But as I examined him more closely, I began to notice details that didn't align with typical hypothermia presentations. His skin, while cold and discolored, felt different than other hypothermia patients I had treated. Instead of the clammy, almost waxy texture you usually see with severe cold exposure, David's skin felt dry and strangely brittle, almost like touching frozen leather. When I pressed on his fingernails to check capillary refill, the blood flow returned normally, which shouldn't happen with hypothermia this severe. Dr. Chen, I called to our attending physician. Can you take a look at this? His skin presentation is unusual for the temperature we're seeing. Dr. Chen came over and performed her own examination, her brow furrowing with concentration. You're right, she said. This doesn't match the typical pathophysiology of hypothermia. His circulation seems surprisingly intact despite the core temperature reading. The second patient, David's wife Margaret, was brought in moments later with identical symptoms. Then their two children, 8-year-old Emma and 5-year-old Joshua, each presenting with the same impossibly low body temperatures and visible breath vapor that defied the laws of physics as I understood them. All 4 family members were conscious but unable to speak, their eyes tracking movement around the room with what appeared to be awareness and intelligence. What struck me most profoundly was the way they looked at each other. Despite their inability to communicate verbally, there seemed to be some kind of silent understanding passing between them. When we positioned Margaret's stretcher next to David's, their eyes met and held contact in a way that suggested they were sharing information or comfort through some means I couldn't comprehend. Tom, I said to the paramedic as he prepared to leave, tell me exactly how you found them, every detail you can remember. Tom pulled out his notepad and reviewed his notes. We got the call at 2:15 a.m. from a passing motorist who saw the car pulled over on the shoulder of Highway 26, about 15 miles west of the city. Engine running, headlights on, hazard lights flashing. When we approached the vehicle, we could see all 4 occupants sitting upright in their seats, completely motionless. The car doors were unlocked, so we opened the driver's side door to check on them. He paused, looking troubled by the memory. That's when we noticed the ice crystals covering every interior surface. The windshield, the side windows, the dashboard, even the seats had this layer of frozen condensation. But here's the thing that really got to me. The car's heater was running at maximum temperature, and when I held my hand near the vents, hot air was definitely coming out. The interior should have been warm, but it felt like stepping into a walk-in freezer. Did you check for carbon monoxide or other gases? Dr. Chen asked. First thing we did, Tom replied. All negative. We ran every test we could think of in the field. No signs of poisoning, no unusual odors, no indication of what might have caused this condition. The car appeared to be functioning normally in every respect, except for the impossible temperature differential. I spent the next hour running every diagnostic test available to us. Blood work, arterial blood gases, toxicology screens, chest x-rays, CT scans of their heads and abdomens. Every single result came back within normal limits, except for the body temperature readings, which consistently showed core temperatures in the high 70s and low 80s across all 4 patients. Their blood chemistry was perfect, showing no signs of the metabolic changes typically associated with severe hypothermia. No acidosis, no electrolyte imbalances, no evidence of organ dysfunction. Most puzzling of all, their brain imaging studies were completely normal. Severe hypothermia typically causes characteristic changes in brain function and structure that are visible on CT scans and MRIs. These patients showed no such changes, despite having body temperatures that should have rendered them unconscious or worse. Dr. Chen ordered aggressive rewarming protocols, but something unprecedented began to happen as we worked. Instead of gradually warming up as expected, the patients seemed to be maintaining their impossibly low body temperatures despite our heated blankets, warm IV fluids, and controlled environmental temperature. It was as if their bodies were actively resisting our attempts to normalize their core temperature. Around 4:30 a.m., I was adjusting Emma's warming blanket when something happened that I still can't fully explain. As I leaned over to check her IV line, I felt a sudden, sharp drop in temperature around her bed. My own breath became visible in the air, and I could feel the cold radiating from her small body like heat from a fire, but in reverse. The temperature drop was so pronounced that frost began forming on the metal rails of her hospital bed. I stepped back from Emma's bedside, watching in disbelief as my breath formed visible clouds in what should have been a warm trauma bay. The digital thermometer on the wall began dropping rapidly, showing a localized temperature decrease of nearly 20 degrees in just the space around her bed. Other staff members noticed immediately, pulling their scrubs tighter and looking around confused. "Jennifer, did someone mess with the thermostat?" Dr. Chen called out, but even as she spoke, I could see her own breath becoming visible as she approached Emma's bedside. The cold seemed to emanate from the child in waves, creating an invisible barrier of frigid air that extended roughly 3 feet in all directions from her body. "I've never seen anything like this," I told Rebecca, who had hurried over to assess the situation. "It's like she's generating cold instead of heat. That's not medically possible." Rebecca checked the HVAC controls and confirmed that our heating system was functioning normally. The temperature readings throughout the rest of the ER remained at standard levels, but the area immediately surrounding each of the Morrison family members had become noticeably colder. Dr. Chen decided to consult with Dr. Patricia Williams, our chief of emergency medicine, who had been practicing for over 30 years. Dr. Williams arrived within minutes and immediately began her own examination of the family. As she moved from patient to patient, I watched her expression change from professional curiosity to genuine bewilderment. "Sarah," she said, using my formal name, which she rarely did, "I want you to document everything you observe about these patients. Every detail, no matter how unusual it seems. I have a feeling this case is going to require extensive review and analysis. Something is happening here that's outside normal medical parameters." I began taking detailed notes, recording not just vital signs and standard observations, but also the environmental changes, the visible breath phenomenon, and the patient's nonverbal communications with each other. As I worked, I noticed that the family members seemed to be coordinating their eye movements and breathing patterns in subtle ways, as if they were somehow connected by an invisible network. Around 5:15 a.m., David Morrison suddenly turned his head toward me and opened his mouth as if trying to speak. No sound came out initially, but I could see the effort he was making to communicate. I leaned closer, and in a voice that was barely above a whisper but clearly audible, he said 3 words that made my blood run cold. "We're still freezing." His voice carried an odd quality, as if it were coming from much further away than his physical body. The words seemed to hang in the air longer than normal speech, and I noticed that as he spoke, the temperature around his bed dropped another few degrees. Margaret, Emma, and Joshua all turned to look at him when he spoke, their eyes wide with what appeared to be relief that he had managed to vocalize what they were all experiencing. "David," I said gently, moving closer despite the cold radiating from his body, "can you tell me what happened to you and your family? How long have you been feeling this cold?" He looked directly at me with eyes that seemed far older and wearier than his 38 years should have allowed. We were driving home from my mother's house, he said slowly, each word requiring obvious effort. Emma and Joshua had fallen asleep in the back seat. Margaret was reading a book. I was just driving, listening to the radio, thinking about work tomorrow. Everything was normal. He paused, closing his eyes as if trying to access a difficult memory. Then the radio started getting static. The heater began making a strange humming noise. Margaret looked up from her book and asked if I heard that sound too. That's when we saw it. Saw what? Dr. Williams asked, moving closer despite the uncomfortable temperature drop. David's breathing became more labored, and I could see that speaking was taking a tremendous toll on his already compromised system. The fog, he whispered. But it wasn't normal fog. It was moving wrong, like it was alive. It came up from the ground and surrounded our car completely. We couldn't see anything outside the windows. Not the road, not other cars, nothing. Just this thick, gray fog that seemed to be pressing against the glass. Margaret suddenly turned toward her husband and managed to speak in the same distant, whispered voice. The temperature inside the car started dropping immediately. We could see our breath, even though the heater was running full blast. The children woke up and asked why it was so cold. Emma, despite being only 8 years old, added her own whispered words. Daddy tried to drive through it, but the car wouldn't move forward anymore. It was like we were stuck in one place, even though the engine was running and the wheels were turning. Young Joshua, barely 5, spoke last in a voice that sounded far too mature for his age. We couldn't get warm no matter what we did. The cold just kept getting deeper and deeper inside us. But we weren't scared. It felt like sleeping, but we could still think and see everything. Dr. Williams and I exchanged glances that conveyed our shared bewilderment. The family's account described an encounter with some kind of atmospheric phenomenon that had somehow altered their basic physiological functions in ways that contradicted everything we knew about human biology and thermodynamics. I need to contact the National Weather Service and see if they recorded any unusual atmospheric conditions in that area. Last night, Dr. Williams said, this is beyond anything in standard medical literature. We may need to involve meteorologists and atmospheric scientists. As the early morning hours progressed, we continued our attempts to warm the Morrison family. But their body temperatures remained stubbornly low. More concerning was the fact that the cold emanating from their bodies seemed to be intensifying rather than diminishing. By 6 a.m., the entire trauma bay had become uncomfortably cold, and we had to bring in additional portable heaters to maintain a workable environment for the medical staff. The family members continued to communicate occasionally, always in those same whispered voices that seemed to come from a great distance. They spoke about their experience in the fog with remarkable consistency, each adding details that supported the other's accounts. They described feeling as if time had stopped while they were trapped in that strange weather phenomenon. And they all agreed that the cold had penetrated not just their bodies, but somehow their very essence. Dr. Chen ran additional blood tests every hour, looking for any changes that might explain their condition or guide our treatment approach. The results remained persistently normal except for the impossible body temperature readings. Their cellular metabolism appeared to be functioning at levels that should have been sustainable only at normal body temperatures. Yet somehow they were maintaining consciousness and basic physiological functions despite readings that should have been fatal. Around 6:30 a.m., as my shift was nearing its end, something began to change. Margaret Morrison suddenly sat up in her bed, moving more easily than she had since her arrival. Her voice when she spoke was stronger and clearer than before. "The fog is lifting," she said, looking toward the windows of the trauma bay, even though they showed only the interior corridor of the hospital. "I can feel it pulling away from us, but slowly, like it doesn't want to let go completely." David nodded in agreement, his own movements becoming more fluid. "It's like being pulled up from the bottom of a deep, cold lake. We're rising toward the surface, but we're not there yet." I checked their vital signs and was amazed to see that their body temperatures had begun to climb, though still far below normal ranges. David's temperature had risen to 82.6 degrees, Margaret's to 81.9. The children showed similar modest improvements, More remarkably, the environmental temperature around their beds began to normalize. The frost that had formed on Emma's bed rails started to melt, and the visible breath phenomenon became less pronounced. It was as if whatever force had been keeping them in that impossible state of suspended hypothermia was gradually releasing its hold on them. Dr. Williams observed these changes with intense fascination. This appears to be some kind of gradual normalization process, she noted. Their bodies seem to be returning to standard thermoregulation, but at a pace that suggests external influence rather than natural recovery. As 7 a.m. approached and the day shift began arriving, I found myself reluctant to leave the Morrison family. Their case had become the most medically inexplicable situation I'd ever encountered, and I felt compelled to see how their recovery would progress. But more than professional curiosity, I felt a deep unease about what their experience suggested about the world we think we understand. The fog they described, the impossible cold that had penetrated their bodies, the way they had maintained consciousness and communication despite physiologically impossible conditions, all of it pointed to something that existed outside the boundaries of conventional medical knowledge. As I gathered my belongings and prepared to head home, I couldn't shake the feeling that the Morrison family had encountered something that fundamentally challenged our understanding of reality itself. Rebecca approached me as I was finishing my documentation. "Sarah," she said, "I've been thinking about what they described. That fog, the way it behaved, the effects it had on them. I've lived in Oregon my entire life, and I've never heard of weather conditions like that." "Neither have I replied, "but what bothers me more is how they're recovering. Their body temperatures are rising, but not in any pattern that makes medical sense. It's like whatever caused this is slowly deciding to let them go." Rebecca was right to be concerned. Over the next hour, as the day shift took over care of the Morrison family, their recovery continued in ways that defied every principle of medicine I had learned in my 15 years of practice. By 8 a.m., David's temperature had reached 85 degrees, Margaret's had climbed to 84.2, and both children showed similar gradual improvements. But it wasn't just the rate of warming that troubled me. It was the pattern. Normal hypothermia recovery follows predictable physiological stages. The body's core temperature rises steadily as external warming measures take effect, blood circulation improves, and metabolic functions gradually normalize. What we were witnessing with the Morrison family was something entirely different. Their temperatures would plateau for 20 or 30 minutes at specific readings, then suddenly jump up by exactly 2.3 degrees across all 4 patients simultaneously, then plateau again. Dr. Williams had never seen anything like it. She called in Dr. Marcus Webb, our hospital's leading specialist in environmental medicine, who arrived around 8:30 a.m. to consult on the case. Dr. Webb had treated hundreds of hypothermia cases during his 20-year career, including several involving extreme cold exposure and near-death situations. After examining the Morrison family and reviewing their charts, he was as baffled as the rest of us. "The synchronization of their temperature increases is medically impossible," he told our assembled team. "Hypothermia recovery is an individual process that varies based on body mass, age, overall health, and dozens of other factors. For 4 different people to show identical warming patterns down to the decimal point suggests some kind of external influence that we're not detecting." "What kind of external influence?" Dr. Williams asked. Dr. Webb shook his head slowly. "I honestly don't know. Nothing in my experience or training provides a framework for understanding this. It's as if their bodies are being warmed by some source that's carefully controlling the process, maintaining precise temperature targets for specific durations." I stayed past the end of my shift, unable to tear myself away from this unprecedented case. Around 9:15 a.m., Emma Morrison suddenly spoke in a voice that was much clearer and stronger than her previous whispered communications. She looked directly at me and said, "The nurse with the kind eyes, you've been taking care of us all night." I was startled that she had been aware of my presence and attention throughout their treatment. "Emma," I said gently, "how are you feeling? Are you getting warmer?" She nodded slowly, her small face showing an expression of wisdom that seemed far beyond her 8 years. "We're coming back," she said. "But it's hard to leave that place. It was so quiet there. And the cold didn't hurt after a while." It felt like floating in a place where time moves differently. I tried to understand what she meant by that place, but before I could ask follow-up questions, something remarkable happened. All four family members suddenly turned their heads in perfect unison to look at the windows facing east, toward the morning sun. Their expressions changed from the distant, somewhat vacant looks they had maintained throughout the night to focused attention, as if they were seeing or sensing something the rest of us couldn't detect. "It's moving away from us now," David said, his voice gaining strength with each word. "I can feel it pulling back, like a tide going out. But it's leaving something behind. A memory of that cold, that stillness. I don't think we'll ever be completely warm again." Margaret reached across the space between their beds and took her husband's hand. Their touch seemed to create a small spark of visible energy, just a brief flash that might have been static electricity, except that it appeared to radiate warmth rather than the sharp sensation of an electrical discharge. Dr. Webb immediately ordered additional tests, including electromagnetic field measurements around their beds and thermal imaging to map their body heat distribution. The results were unlike anything he had documented before. The thermal imaging showed that their bodies were warming from the inside out in concentric circles, starting from their hearts and radiating outward in perfectly symmetrical patterns. Normal hypothermia recovery shows irregular warming as circulation improves, but the Morrison family displayed mathematical precision in their heat distribution. The electromagnetic readings were equally puzzling. Each family member was generating a weak but measurable electromagnetic field that pulsed in sync with their heartbeats. More significantly, their individual fields seemed to be harmonizing with each other, creating interference patterns that Dr. Webb's equipment could detect but couldn't explain. Around 10:30 a.m., Joshua Morrison, the youngest family member, said something that made everyone in the trauma bay stop what they were doing. In his small, clear voice, he announced, "The Fog people say thank you for keeping us safe while we were visiting." "Why, the Fog people?" I asked, kneeling beside his bed. "Joshua, what do you mean by the Fog people?" He looked at me with eyes that held far more understanding than any 5-year-old should possess. "They live in the cold place where we went," he said matter-of-factly. "They don't have bodies like us, so they wanted to know what it felt like to be warm and have heartbeats and breathe air. They borrowed us for a while to experience being human, but they were very careful not to hurt us." Dr. Williams exchanged a look with Dr. Webb that conveyed both professional skepticism and genuine unease. Children often create elaborate explanations for traumatic experiences, but Joshua's account was delivered with such calm certainty that it was difficult to dismiss as fantasy or confusion. Margaret Morrison added her own perspective. "We could sense them around us while we were in that fog. They weren't frightening, just incredibly curious. It felt like they were learning about warmth and life and family love through our experiences. They showed us their world in return, a place where temperature and time work differently than here." "What did their world look like?" Dr. Webb asked, his scientific curiosity overriding his skepticism. Emma answered for her mother. "It wasn't a place you see with your eyes. It was more like a feeling of endless space filled with whispers and movements that were almost like music. Everything there exists in a state of perfect stillness, but it's not empty stillness. It's full of awareness and intelligence that's very old and very patient." David Morrison's temperature had reached 88 degrees by 11 a.m., and his cognitive function appeared to be returning to normal levels. He began asking practical questions about their car, how long they had been in the hospital, and whether anyone had contacted his employer to explain his absence from work. But even as his rational, everyday concerns returned, he continued to reference the experience in the fog with absolute conviction. "I need to call my insurance company about the car," he said. "But I also need to understand what happened to us out there. Those beings, or whatever they were, they showed us things about the nature of cold and heat that science doesn't recognize. Temperature isn't just a measurement of molecular motion. It's a form of communication, a way of sharing information across different types of existence." Dr. Webb had been taking detailed notes throughout these conversations, but I could see the strain on his face as he tried to reconcile the family's accounts with his medical training. He pulled me aside around 11:30 and spoke in low, concerned tones. "Sarah, in 30 years of practicing medicine, I've learned to distinguish between trauma-induced hallucinations, shared psychotic episodes, and genuine experiences that fall outside normal parameters. This family is describing their encounter with complete consistency, rich detail, and no signs of psychological disturbance. Either they've all developed identical delusions, which is virtually impossible, or they actually experience something that challenges our understanding of reality. What are you suggesting? I asked, though I suspected I knew where his thoughts were leading. He looked back at the Morrison family, who were now sitting up in their beds and engaging in normal conversation while maintaining their unnaturally low but steadily rising body temperatures. I'm suggesting that we may be dealing with a phenomenon that exists at the intersection of meteorology, physics, and something else entirely. Something that our current scientific framework isn't equipped to explain or categorize. The question is, how do we document and report a case that has no established diagnostic criteria or treatment protocols? By noon, all 4 family members had reached body temperatures in the low 90s, still below normal but within ranges that no longer posed immediate medical danger. Their vital signs had stabilized, their cognitive function appeared intact, and they were able to eat and drink normally. From a standard medical perspective, they were ready for discharge. But Dr. Williams was reluctant to release them without understanding more about their condition and ensuring that their recovery would continue progressing normally. Margaret Morrison asked to speak with me privately around 12:30 p.m. I approached her bedside, and she gestured for me to lean closer so she could speak quietly without the other staff members overhearing. "Sarah," she said, using my name though I didn't recall telling her what to call me. "You've been more than just our nurse tonight. You've been a witness to something extraordinary. And I think you understand that what happened to us was real, even if it can't be explained medically." I nodded because she was absolutely right. Despite my scientific training and 15 years of experience with unusual medical cases, I couldn't dismiss what I had observed as hallucination or coincidence. "Those beings that Joshua calls the fog people," Margaret continued, "they're still connected to us somehow. Not in a harmful way, but like an echo of the experience we shared. We can sense temperature changes differently now, and we can feel the presence of cold in ways that go beyond normal physical sensation. This isn't going to just go away when our body temperatures return to normal." "What are you trying to tell me?" I asked, though part of me already suspected what she was going to say. Margaret's expression became serious, almost urgent. "We're different now, changed in ways that won't show up on medical tests or brain scans. That encounter opened something in us, created a connection to aspects of existence that most people never experience. You've been exposed to it too, just by caring for us and witnessing what happened. You're going to start noticing things, feeling things that don't fit with your understanding of the world." I wanted to dismiss her words as the lingering effects of her traumatic experience, but even as she spoke, I realized that I had been sensing unusual temperature variations throughout the morning. Subtle changes in the air around certain patients, cold spots that appeared and disappeared without apparent cause, and a heightened awareness of the thermal environment that I had never experienced before. Around 1 p.m., Dr. Williams made the decision to keep the Morrison family for additional observation, despite their improving condition. She wanted to monitor their continued recovery and document any unusual phenomena that might help medical science understand what they had experienced. But she also confided to me that she was concerned about releasing them without knowing whether their encounter might have ongoing effects. The afternoon shift took over their care, but I found myself returning to check on them several times before finally leaving the hospital around 3 p.m. Each time I visited, their body temperatures had continued rising in those same precisely timed increments, and their descriptions of the fog encounter remained consistent and detailed. As I drove home through the Portland afternoon, I couldn't stop thinking about what Margaret had said about being changed by the experience. The city looked different somehow, as if I were seeing it through altered perception. I noticed temperature variations in ways I never had before, subtle differences in the warmth radiating from buildings, cars, and even other people. When I arrived at my apartment, I immediately called my sister Linda, who worked as a meteorologist for the National Weather Service. I needed to know if there had been any unusual atmospheric conditions reported in the area where the Morrison family was found. "Linda," I said when she answered, "I need you to check something for me. Were there any unusual weather phenomena reported on Highway 26 early this morning, around 2 a.m.? Fog formations, temperature anomalies, anything out of the ordinary?" She put me on hold while she accessed the weather data, then came back with information that sent chills down my spine. Sarah, that's strange that you ask. We did get several reports of localized fog formation in that exact area, but our satellite imagery doesn't show anything consistent with the eyewitness accounts. Multiple drivers reported encountering dense fog that seemed to appear and disappear suddenly, but our meteorological instruments detected no atmospheric conditions that would support fog formation. What do you mean? I asked, though I was beginning to understand the implications. According to our data, the atmospheric pressure, humidity levels, and temperature gradients in that area were completely stable throughout the night. There was no meteorological basis for fog formation, yet we received at least 6 separate reports of drivers encountering thick fog that impaired visibility for brief periods. Linda paused, then added something that made my blood run cold. The really weird thing is that all the fog reports came from the same specific stretch of highway, maybe a quarter-mile section, and they all occurred between 1:45 and 2:30 a.m. After 2:30, no more fog reports. It's like whatever was causing it just stopped happening at a specific time. I thanked Linda and hung up, my mind racing with the implications of what she had told me. The Morrison family's encounter had occurred during a window of time when multiple people had experienced unexplained atmospheric phenomena in the exact location where they were found. Whatever had happened to them wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a larger event that had affected other travelers as well. Over the following days, I found myself unable to concentrate on routine nursing duties. Every patient seemed to carry subtle temperature signatures that I had never noticed before. Cold spots appeared and disappeared around the hospital in patterns that made no logical sense. Most disturbing of all, I began experiencing episodes where I could see my own breath indoors, even in heated buildings, as if the Morrison family's condition was somehow contagious. A week after the incident, I received a phone call from Margaret Morrison. She and her family had been discharged after their body temperatures returned to normal ranges, but she wanted to share something with me that she felt was important. "Sarah," she said, "we've all been experiencing ongoing changes since that night. We can sense temperature in ways that go far beyond normal physical sensation. David can tell when it's going to rain hours before weather forecasters predict it, just by feeling subtle changes in atmospheric pressure and humidity. The children can find warm spots in cold rooms that aren't detectable by thermometers. But more significantly," she continued, "we've been having shared dreams about that place we visited, the realm of the fog people. They're trying to communicate with us to share information about the nature of temperature and energy that could revolutionize our understanding of physics and meteorology." Margaret's words confirmed what I had begun to suspect about my own experiences. The encounter with the Morrison family had opened some kind of perceptual doorway that allowed me to sense aspects of the physical world that normally remain hidden from human awareness. But unlike the family, who had been directly exposed to whatever phenomenon had caused their condition, I was experiencing secondary effects that were more subtle but equally disturbing. 2 weeks after the incident, I made the decision that would ultimately end my nursing career. I submitted a request to Dr. Williams for extended leave, citing the need to process the psychological impact of the Morrison case. But the truth was that I could no longer function effectively as a nurse when I was constantly distracted by temperature anomalies and atmospheric disturbances that no one else could detect. Dr. Williams granted my leave request, but she also asked me to participate in a case study that she was preparing for publication in the Journal of Emergency Medicine. The Morrison family had agreed to undergo extensive follow-up testing and interviews, and she wanted my detailed observations as their primary nurse during the critical hours of their treatment. The case study process required me to revisit every detail of that night, to analyze and document phenomena that challenged the fundamental assumptions of medical science. As I worked on my contribution to the research, I realized that the Morrison family's experience represented something far more significant than an isolated medical anomaly. It was evidence of aspects of reality that exist beyond the boundaries of conventional scientific understanding. The fog people that Joshua had described, the impossible synchronization of the family's recovery patterns, the ongoing changes in their perception and abilities, all of it pointed to the existence of forms of consciousness and energy that interact with our physical world in ways that we're only beginning to recognize. But recognizing the reality of these phenomena and learning to live with their effects were two entirely different challenges. As the weeks passed, my sensitivity to temperature variations continued to intensify. I could sense the thermal signatures of people's emotions, detect illness through subtle changes in body heat distribution, and feel the presence of what I could only describe as cold spots of intelligence that seemed to exist in spaces between normal reality. The Morrison family maintained contact with me throughout this period, sharing their own ongoing experiences and offering support as I struggled to adapt to my altered perceptions. They had formed a kind of informal support group, meeting regularly to discuss their continued connection to the realm they had visited and the ways their encounter continued to influence their daily lives. David Morrison had left his job as an accountant and begun working with atmospheric researchers who were interested in studying unexplained weather phenomena. Margaret had started documenting their shared dreams and the information about temperature and energy that the fog people continued to communicate to them. Emma and Joshua were adapting to their new abilities with the resilience of children, but they required careful guidance to help them understand and control their enhanced sensitivity to thermal environments. 3 months after that unforgettable shift, I finally submitted my resignation from Mercy General Hospital. The decision wasn't made lightly, but I could no longer practice conventional nursing when my perception of the world had been fundamentally altered by exposure to phenomena that existed outside the boundaries of established medical knowledge. In my resignation letter, I wrote that I was leaving to pursue other opportunities in healthcare. But the truth was far more complex. The Morrison case had opened my awareness to aspects of reality that couldn't be addressed through traditional medical practice. I needed time and space to understand what had happened to me and to explore the implications of what I had witnessed. Dr. Williams was understanding but clearly concerned about losing an experienced nurse over what the hospital administration was classifying as an unusual but explainable medical case. She asked if I would consider staying on with reduced responsibilities or perhaps transferring to a different department, but I knew that wouldn't solve the fundamental problem. The changes I was experiencing weren't going to fade with time or distance from the emergency department. My last shift at Mercy General was on April 15th, exactly 3 months after the Morrison incident. I had requested to work one final night shift, partly for closure, but mostly because I wanted to see if my altered perceptions would provide any insights into other patients' conditions. What I discovered during those 11 hours confirmed that my transformation was permanent and far more extensive than I had initially realized. Around midnight, we received a car accident victim who appeared to have minor injuries from a fender bender on Interstate 84. The patient, a woman in her 40s named Janet Crawford, presented with standard symptoms of whiplash and some bruising from her seatbelt. Her vital signs were normal, her neurological function was intact, and she was alert and conversational. By all medical standards, she was a routine case requiring observation for a few hours before discharge. But as I approached her bedside to take her initial vitals, I immediately sensed something that made me pause. There was a distinct cold emanation from her torso, not visible to others but unmistakably present to my enhanced perception. It wasn't the generalized hypothermia we had seen with the Morrison family, but rather a localized area of thermal disturbance centered around her chest and upper abdomen. "Janet," I said as I positioned my stethoscope, "have you been experiencing any chest pain or difficulty breathing since the accident?" She shook her head confidently. "Nothing like that at all. I feel fine except for some soreness in my neck and shoulders. Just shaken up from the impact, you know?" I listened to her heart and lungs, which sounded completely normal. But the cold sensation I was detecting seemed to be intensifying rather than diminishing. I had learned from the Morrison case to trust these new perceptions, even when they contradicted standard medical findings. I decided to mention my concerns to Dr. Chen, who was covering the emergency department that night. "Amanda," I said, pulling her aside, "I know this sounds unusual, but I think we should run some additional tests on the car accident patient in bed 7. Something doesn't feel right about her presentation." Dr. Chen looked at me with the expression I had become accustomed to seeing when I shared observations that couldn't be explained through conventional medical assessment. "Sarah, her vitals are stable, and she's showing no signs of internal injury." "What specifically concerns you?" I struggled to find words that wouldn't make me sound delusional or incompetent. I can't explain it medically, but I have a strong intuition that there's something we're missing. "Could we do a chest X-ray and maybe some blood work? just to be thorough. Dr. Chen agreed to order the additional tests, though I could see she was humoring me rather than sharing my concerns. The chest X-ray revealed what appeared to be a small shadow in Janet's right lung that hadn't been visible on her initial examination. The blood work showed elevated levels of certain enzymes that suggested possible internal bleeding, despite her lack of symptoms. Further imaging studies revealed that Janet had sustained a small tear in her lung tissue that was slowly leaking air into her chest cavity. The condition, called a pneumothorax, was in its early stages and hadn't yet progressed to the point where it would cause obvious respiratory distress. But without treatment, it could have become life-threatening within hours. Dr. Chen was amazed by the accuracy of my intuition. "Sarah, how did you know to look for that?" Janet showed no clinical signs of pneumothorax, and her mechanism of injury didn't suggest that level of internal trauma. I couldn't tell her the truth about my enhanced thermal perception, so I simply said that something about her presentation had seemed inconsistent to me. The successful diagnosis of Janet's hidden injury reinforced my understanding that the changes I had undergone weren't just psychological or imaginary. I was genuinely perceiving aspects of patients' conditions that weren't detectable through standard medical assessment. But this ability came with a burden of responsibility that I wasn't sure I could handle within the constraints of conventional nursing practice. Throughout the remainder of that final shift, I found myself detecting thermal anomalies in several other patients. A teenager with a seemingly minor ankle sprain was emanating cold from his lower leg in a pattern that suggested a hairline fracture that hadn't shown up on initial x-rays. An elderly man complaining of indigestion had a warm spot radiating from his chest that made me suspect he was having cardiac issues despite normal EKG readings. Each time I shared my concerns with the attending physicians, additional testing revealed conditions that would have been missed through routine evaluation. By the end of the shift, word had spread among the medical staff that I was having an unusually successful night for catching subtle diagnoses. But I knew that what they were attributing to exceptional clinical intuition was actually the result of perceptual abilities that I couldn't explain or control. As I completed my final documentation and prepared to leave Mercy General for the last time, Rebecca Santos approached me with a mixture of admiration and confusion. "Sarah," she said, "I've worked with you for 8 years, and I've never seen diagnostic accuracy like what you demonstrated tonight. Are you sure you want to leave nursing? You could revolutionize emergency medicine with instincts like that." I thanked Rebecca for her kind words, but I knew that my enhanced abilities weren't sustainable within the framework of conventional medical practice. How could I explain to colleagues and supervisors that I was making diagnostic recommendations based on thermal perceptions that no one else could detect? How could I document findings that had no basis in established medical science? More troubling was the question of whether my new abilities were stable or if they might continue evolving in unpredictable ways. The Morrison family had reported ongoing changes in their perception and capabilities months after their initial encounter. What if my sensitivity to temperature variations was just the beginning of a transformation process that would eventually make it impossible for me to function in normal society? I drove home from my final shift as the sun was rising over Portland, feeling a mixture of relief and uncertainty about the future. I had spent 15 years building a career in emergency nursing, developing skills and expertise that were now overshadowed by abilities I couldn't understand or explain. The rational part of my mind suggested that I should seek psychiatric evaluation for what might be elaborate hallucinations or stress-induced perceptual disturbances. But the evidence of my enhanced diagnostic accuracy made it impossible to dismiss my experiences as psychological phenomena. Over the following weeks, I began researching similar cases in medical literature and online forums. I discovered that there were scattered reports throughout history of healthcare workers who claimed to develop enhanced diagnostic abilities after exposure to unusual medical cases. Most of these accounts were dismissed as pseudoscience or wishful thinking, but the patterns described were remarkably similar to what I was experiencing. Dr. Williams contacted me several times during this period to discuss the Morrison case study she was preparing for publication. The family had continued to undergo testing and evaluation, and their results continued to challenge conventional medical understanding. Their enhanced temperature sensitivity had stabilized at levels that allowed them to function normally in daily life, but they maintained abilities that were far beyond normal human perception. Sarah, Dr. Williams said during one of our phone conversations, "I want you to know that your documentation of the Morrison case has been invaluable to our research. But I'm also concerned about how the experience has affected you personally. Have you considered that your decision to leave nursing might be premature?" I appreciated her concern, but I knew that my path forward lay outside traditional medical practice. The encounter with the Morrison family had opened my awareness to aspects of healing and human perception that couldn't be addressed through conventional healthcare approaches. I needed to find ways to use my enhanced abilities that didn't require me to fit them into frameworks that couldn't accommodate their reality. Margaret Morrison had mentioned during one of our conversations that there were others like us, people who had been changed by encounters with phenomena that existed at the edges of normal reality. She had been contacted by researchers who were studying what they called experiential anomalies, cases where individuals developed enhanced perceptual abilities following exposure to unexplained events. In May, about a month after leaving Mercy General, I received a phone call from Dr. Elena Vasquez, a researcher at the Institute for Consciousness Studies in California. She explained that she had learned about my case through Dr. Williams and was interested in studying the secondary effects experienced by healthcare workers who had treated patients with anomalous conditions. "Sarah," Dr. Vasquez said, "we're documenting cases like yours across the country. Medical professionals who develop enhanced diagnostic abilities after treating patients with unexplained conditions. We believe these experiences represent a form of consciousness transfer or perceptual enhancement that could revolutionize our understanding of human potential." She invited me to participate in a research program that would allow me to work with other individuals who had undergone similar transformations. The Institute was developing protocols for understanding and utilizing enhanced perceptual abilities in healthcare settings, approaching these phenomena from a scientific perspective while acknowledging that they existed outside conventional medical frameworks. The opportunity to work with researchers who took my experiences seriously, rather than dismissing them as hallucinations or stress responses, was exactly what I needed. I agreed to join Dr. Vasquez's research program, beginning a new chapter in my career that would allow me to explore the implications of my enhanced abilities without the constraints of traditional medical practice. Before leaving Portland to join the research program in California, I made one final visit to the Morrison family. They had become something of a support system for me during my transition, the only people who truly understood what it meant to have your perception of reality fundamentally altered by an encounter with phenomena that existed beyond normal experience. David Morrison had established a small consulting business, working with meteorologists and atmospheric researchers to investigate unexplained weather phenomena. His enhanced sensitivity to atmospheric conditions had proven invaluable for predicting and understanding unusual weather patterns. Margaret had begun writing a book about their experience, documenting not just the initial encounter, but the ongoing ways their lives had been transformed by their connection to what Joshua continued to call the fog people. Emma and Joshua had adapted to their enhanced abilities with remarkable resilience. Emma could detect illness in other children through subtle temperature variations, while Joshua had developed an uncanny ability to find lost objects by sensing their thermal history. Both children were thriving academically and socially, though they required ongoing guidance to help them understand when to share their unusual insights and when to keep them private. During my farewell visit, Margaret shared something that provided context for everything I had experienced since that night in January. "Sarah," she said, "what happened to our family wasn't random. The fog people, as Joshua calls them, are drawn to places where people are ready to expand their understanding of reality. They don't just encounter anyone. They seek out individuals who have the capacity to bridge different forms of consciousness and awareness. You were chosen to witness our experience because you have the sensitivity and openness necessary to integrate enhanced perceptions into your understanding of healing and human potential. Your nursing career wasn't ending that night. It was being transformed into something that could serve humanity in ways that conventional medicine never could." As I prepared to leave Portland and begin my new work with Dr. Vasquez's research program, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this point. 6 months earlier, I had been a competent but conventional emergency room nurse, confident in my medical training and comfortable with the established boundaries of healthcare practice. The Morrison case had shattered those boundaries. opening my awareness to aspects of human experience that existed far beyond the scope of traditional medicine. The enhanced perceptual abilities I'd developed weren't a burden or a psychological disorder, as I had initially feared. They were tools for understanding health and illness in ways that could revolutionize healthcare if properly studied and integrated. The Institute's research program offered the opportunity to work with others who had undergone similar transformations, developing protocols for using enhanced abilities in therapeutic settings. My last night in Portland, I stood on the balcony of my apartment looking out over the city where I had spent 15 years caring for people in their moments of greatest vulnerability. The thermal landscape that I now perceived revealed patterns of human activity and emotional energy that created a living map of the community's collective well-being. I could sense areas of illness and distress, but also zones of healing and regeneration that spoke to the resilience of human nature. The fog people, whatever they truly were, had given me a gift that I was only beginning to understand. Through my encounter with the Morrison family, I had been open to perceptions that allowed me to serve others in ways I had never imagined possible. As I packed my belongings and prepared for the next phase of my journey, I felt grateful for the night that had changed everything. The shift that had ended my conventional nursing career but opened doorways to possibilities I was still discovering. The research at the Institute for Consciousness Studies would allow me to explore those possibilities with others who shared similar experiences, working toward a future where enhanced human perception could be understood, developed, and utilized for the benefit of all humanity. The Morrison case had been the beginning of a transformation that was far from complete, but I now understood that the journey itself was as important as any destination I might reach. That shift on January 23rd changed everything I thought I knew about medicine, reality, and what it means to truly heal someone. The Morrison family didn't just recover from an impossible medical condition that night. They opened a doorway to understanding consciousness and human potential in ways that conventional science can't explain or measure. 6 months later, working with Dr. Vasquez's research team, I've met dozens of healthcare workers who've had similar experiences. Nurses who can sense illness through temperature variations. Doctors who developed enhanced diagnostic abilities after treating patients with unexplained conditions. Paramedics who can detect life signs that don't show up on standard equipment. We're not crazy, and we're not alone. The fog people that little Joshua described are still out there, still making contact with those who are ready to expand their understanding of what's possible. They're not malevolent entities or supernatural beings. They're consciousness itself, reaching across dimensions to help us evolve beyond the limitations we've accepted as normal. If you're a healthcare worker watching this and you've experienced something that doesn't fit with your medical training, something that made you question everything you thought you knew about healing and human awareness, know that there are others like us. Your enhanced perceptions aren't a sign of mental illness or professional burnout. They're tools for serving humanity in ways that could transform medicine forever. The Morrison family taught me that healing isn't just about fixing what's broken. Sometimes it's about opening ourselves to possibilities that exist beyond the boundaries of what we think we know. That night in the ER wasn't the end of my nursing career. It was the beginning of something far more extraordinary than I ever could have imagined.